A 24-year-old University of Florida student is found dead in her bed. There's no visible signs of injury, no forced entry, and no clues left behind. Her death was initially considered to be from natural causes until the medical examiner noticed something that she's never seen before. This case was the very first case of its kind, and as scary as it was confusing. It rocked the Florida college town, leaving everyone feeling like the person next to them could be a suspect. Today, I'm going to tell you what happened to Michelle Herndon. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimbyrleigha. If you've never been here before, nice to finally meet you. I am so glad you're here. Jumping right in, I'm happy to announce we have a very loyal sponsor for today's video. They've been one of the biggest supporters of this channel, and they're back again making this video possible, and that is PDS Debt. PDS Debt is also giving all of you a free debt saving breakdown. For completing this 30-second online debt assessment, you go to pdsdebt.com/Kim. That's pdsdebt.com/KIM. You will receive a full breakdown of all the interest that you shouldn't be paying each month and multiple options on how they can help you get rid of it. I've been working with PDS Debt now for a few months, and I'm hearing feedback from all of you, which I love. And a lot of you say you wish you would have looked into something like this sooner, and I can definitely relate. I know that finances are a stressful topic, believe me, and I'm not an expert. I'm just coming to you as a friend because I know firsthand how easy it is to ignore it. And if you're ignoring your debt, you're most likely missing out on thousands that you could be saving in interest and monthly payments with PDS Debt, because I was there. I know. It's not something that I really took seriously or even understood until I was in over my head. I really like PDS Debt because they have customized 0% interest options for anyone struggling with credit card debt, personal loans, medical bills, and collection accounts. Yes, collection accounts. I hated knowing that I had things in collections. Every time I would hear that, they'd say, it went into collections. And I'm like, yeah. PDS Debt rolls all of your payments into one low 0% interest monthly payment. Everyone with over $10,000 in debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. Bad credit and fair credit are accepted. If you're like me and you were making monthly payments on your debt and your balances were not going down, this program is for you. Pay off your debt in a fraction of the time and just complete this quick and easy debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/Kim. Again, pdsdebt.com/KIM. And take back your financial freedom. And once again, thank you so much, PDS Debt, for making this video possible. Now, let's get into the case for today. I'm going to be telling you what happened to Michelle Herndon. Michelle Ann Herndon was born July 15th, 1981 in Live Oak, Florida, to her parents Donald and Belinda Herndon. Live Oak is a small town. It's located east of Tallahassee, and in 2010, the population was only about 6,800 people. It's named for the live oak trees that you'll find there, and the parks are shaded with the canopies of ancient oaks, and they drip with the Spanish moss. And Michelle came from this small town. She was used to everyone knowing each other, and more than that, trusting one another. And this is the kind of town where the residents didn't even lock their doors. Michelle and her family attended a church together. It was called Friendship Baptist Church, and they valued their faith. They tried to live their lives in a way that reflected it. By the time Michelle was in college, she had become a very well-rounded, intelligent, hardworking woman with dreams of graduating with a degree in anthropology and joining the Peace Corps. In 2005, she was a student at University of Florida in Gainesville. She also worked at a health and fitness center to pay for school, and she was a personal trainer there, and then she spent most of her free time volunteering with animals. One of the places she volunteered at was called Jungle Friends Primate Sanctuary. And as a matter of fact, there's this personal page that was created for each one of the volunteers with a statement written by each and every one, and I was able to find Michelle's, and I want to read it to you. This is one of the only ways we'll ever quote unquote hear her voice and know the way that she thought, at least when it comes to a place like this that she loved. I'll go ahead and put a picture up on the screen of the website while I'm reading it to you. It says, quote, "As I look back through this past year at Jungle Friends, I not only see how much I was able to contribute to Jungle Friends, but most of all, I see how Jungle Friends has contributed to me and my goals. Volunteering at Jungle Friends has allowed me to broaden my horizons and expand my mind. Also, I've been taught the importance of patience and understanding, skills that are incorporated into my everyday life. Jungle Friends helps people to reach their potential and to really shine. Throughout this year, I have had the privilege of not only meeting all of the Jungle Friends monkeys, but also forming personal relationships with them and learning each of their individual personalities. Through Jungle Friends, I have seen a whole new world, and I'm better able to appreciate the beauty of the monkeys. Another thing I've learned through Jungle Friends is leadership and dedication. These skills were shown to me through Jungle Friends head keeper, Erin. Erin has been a role model for me since day one, and every day that I work with her, I'm inspired by her a little more. Jungle Friends has been a very valuable experience that has taught me that with hard work comes great rewards. I'm extremely happy that we all have been given the opportunity to experience the beauty of Jungle Friends." Unquote. I also wanted to give you some more information about Michelle. She was one of the Jungle Friends' first volunteers, and she received one of their coveted awards called the Top Banana Awards. Sounds silly, but when you're in that atmosphere, these things matter, and her coworkers called her an incredible young woman. They had the pleasure of getting to know her since 1999 when she initially started volunteering. Michelle considered everyone a friend. People explained how Michelle fully believed that each and every person could make a positive change in the world. And that is the standard by which she lived her life. Michelle felt like it was her responsibility as a compassionate and able person to help anyone or any animal that was in need. That's just who she was. Not only did Michelle work with animals at Jungle Friends, but she volunteered at numerous animal welfare organizations. She sponsored a child in Africa. She frequently donated blood. She even started a recycling program at her work and was an advocate for the homeless. Michelle was a strong force that encouraged and inspired change in our world. There was just a natural ease to Michelle, and she was always smiling. She was fun-loving, she was witty, and people said that she could just brighten anyone's spirits. Her dream was to study gorillas. She anticipated joining the Peace Corps in Africa after graduating from the University of Florida. The monkey that she bonded with the most was little Chi-Chi, and I'm going to put Chi-Chi on the screen right here. This is what fulfilled Michelle. She loved animals. She even had a dog that she took to the local dog park all the time. And I also found that having a dog when I was in college was a great companion, especially when you're spending a lot of time at home studying. It's really nice to have someone to come home to. One of the maybe negative things you could say about Michelle was that she suffered from chronic debilitating migraines. Now, if you have never had a migraine, I just want you to understand how life-altering they can be. They're not just headaches. So if you've had one of those, I know how bad they are, but just imagine that pain being way more severe and way longer lasting. As a matter of fact, Michelle had been diagnosed with having chronic migraines. And as I was researching this, it's actually considered a disease, and it consists of having at least 8 migraines in a month and a combination of migraines and headaches 15 days or more a month. People with this condition spend half of the month in pain. This is pain that stops them from living their life to the fullest. Here are just some of the symptoms: nausea, vomiting, sensitivity to light and sound, changes in your vision, sensation, and speech. But they include a lot more symptoms. If you suffer from migraines, let me know in the comments and let me know your symptoms and your experience. I do try to avoid injecting too much of my own personal experiences in these stories, but I'd like to quickly share that I also have an invisible illness like chronic migraines, so I can relate to Michelle a lot, and that's why I actually started relating to the story and wanted to research it. I actually have a chronic cerebral fluid leak, which is known as intracranial hypotension. Oddly, they call people like me leakers, which I think is a kind of gross way to define us, but I leak spinal fluid. Mine leaks through a small hole in my dura, which is the spongy material that protects your spine. I had a botched lumbar puncture, which is also known as a spinal tap, back in 2013, and it left me unable to walk or even sit up for almost 3 months. The pain that I went through was unbearable. It was excruciating. Nothing else mattered in my life. Just my health, just getting better. Social media didn't matter. Friends didn't matter. I couldn't even lift my head to eat. There's definitely a lot more to my story, but thankfully I healed enough to where I can easily cope with any pain that I still experience spontaneously nowadays. Sometimes though, I can't function normally and it affects my life and my work, but by looking at people like me or Michelle, you wouldn't be able to tell. Michelle was suffering but she tried to make the best of everything. She had tried so many different treatments, but nothing seemed to help, mostly because you have multiple symptoms to take care of. And you have to take something different for each one. If you have nausea and vomiting, there's one medication, something for your neck pain, something for your head pain, and then the list goes on and on. Aside from the migraines, Michelle's life was great, and her future was really coming together. In 2005, Michelle was one of the thousands of students coming back into Gainesville to resume or begin their college studies. She was going into her senior year. Like many other students paying for college on their own, Michelle didn't have that much money. So she was living on a small house. It was off campus, and the streets were lined with a number of other low-cost student housing. And yes, her friends would occasionally tease her because, she wasn't as cool as maybe a sorority sister or something like that, but she found it perfectly fine. She liked her cute little bungalow, and the sorority life and stuff just wasn't really Michelle's thing anyway. I have pictures of the interior, and I have to say, she really did have the bare minimum in there, which is actually pretty typical of a lot of college students, but she basically had a mattress in the middle of a room. Almost looks like it was the living room. And she's got boxes that hadn't even been unpacked yet, random, kitchen utensils, appliances, a desk, the things that you need to get by. Besides, Michelle spent most of her time at her best friend's house, and her best friend's name is Jessica. Jessica and Michelle just hit it off when they both started college. They just clicked. They had very similar personalities. Jessica lived on campus, and she had a pretty large group of friends, and her house was always full of people, sometimes new people. I was kind of curious why Jessica and Michelle didn't just live together, and I never found any information on that, but Jessica did already have a roommate, and his name is Oliver. He was a 27-year-old from Georgia, and he was working at the University of Florida Shands Hospital in the emergency surgery department. It was important to Jessica to find quality, reliable roommates with good jobs like Oliver's, and perhaps the rent was high, and that's why Michelle didn't want to live there. I don't know. But Jessica's house was nice, and it was a lot of fun. There was a big backyard and a fire pit where friends could come and they could have drinks and enjoy the cooler weather at night, warm up by the fire. And then it also had this large kitchen table that could sit like 12 people. So it was the perfect college house. So going back to Michelle's life, what about her love life? Well, that was also a little complicated. I wouldn't call it negative, but complicated. She was definitely interested in settling down, but that fall, she was in an on and off again relationship with a guy named Jason Deering. He lived all the way in Miami, which is about 400 miles away from Gainesville. Michelle was definitely not shy about expressing her feelings about her love life. She would talk about it to her friends all the time, including Oliver. And that added a little more complexity sometimes when you have a guy friend, because I've been there. You sometimes want the perspective of a male, and that's another reason why Michelle loved to spend time at Jessica's. Oliver being just a little bit older, Michelle's 24, he's 27. He could lend an ear and sometimes even a shoulder to cry on when Michelle was in need. He would listen to her frustrations, her hopes, and her dreams. They were friends. Some thought they even might be more. Michelle and Oliver seemed to have a lot in common and spend a lot of time together. They would go to concerts. They would have coffee together almost every morning, from what I gathered. But Michelle, she would deny that there was anything romantic going on between them. Isn't that always the story where the girl's sort of like, he's just my good friend, and the guy's like, I want her. But Michelle would laugh it off and say, nope. We're just really good friends. And he was a good friend. Oliver went into nursing to help people, so maybe that's why he liked spending time listening to Michelle. She opened up about her complex love life. He was also helping Michelle in another way, a medical one. Maybe it wasn't exactly above board, but since Michelle would frequently complain about her migraines, Oliver felt like he had a duty to help, being a nurse. So he did mention to her he could get her some medical grade migraine medicine. He probably shouldn't have been risking his job, but the truth is he did like Michelle a lot, and she would constantly have to stay at home or rest due to her migraines, and that's no fun. So sooner or later, Oliver was giving Michelle medication from the hospital on a regular basis, and guess what? It worked. Sometimes things that you get from the hospital, you obviously know are like professional grade, whereas when we get something over the counter, it just doesn't have that oomph. Michelle was finally getting the relief she hoped for, but could never actually make a reality. And this was life-changing for her. She was extremely thankful to Oliver, and in turn, she would hang out with him and try to be there for him as well. Oliver would also share his own stories about his past in the army. He was a captain in the Air Force. He also did some work in Africa. And you just heard Michelle's very interested in moving to Africa. So they had that in common. He had been sent to Afghanistan right after 9/11. So, he would share some of his hardships. At the time, Michelle was in a long-distance relationship with her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Jason. They decided to give each other some space. They were at the age and phase of life when you're trying to piece everything together. You're not sure if your partners are forever or for right now, and neither one of them wanted the other to feel that they were holding them back. Michelle was also casually dating a guy named Scott, and he was a lot of fun. He was a lot different from Jason, and also... Funny enough, the name Jason and Scott were the names of both of my ex-fiancés. Interesting. Scott was a musician. He was a guitarist, actually. And he was in a band that the girls would go watch at different venues all the time. I gotta say, Oliver wasn't exactly thrilled about any of the guys that Michelle was dating. He thought that they were just leading her on and never good enough. And all of Michelle's friends knew Oliver had a crush on her. It's kind of expected when you tell another guy all these things you don't like about your long-distance boyfriend and guys you're seeing, he's going to have negative feelings in regard to them. And Oliver didn't hide it, especially around Jason, because when he would show up, Oliver would definitely make his presence known. And maybe it was sort of a territorial thing. I don't know, maybe Oliver felt led on. Either way, Michelle did find it a little overbearing and unnecessary because after all, she wanted it to work out with Jason. He just wasn't ready to commit. One time, and you can tell me what you think of all this, of course, in the comments, Oliver came over to Michelle's the day that she was expecting Jason, and he just stood there. He's just watching them. And this would obviously make Michelle upset and confused. And she would even call out to him and say, what are you doing? And this was most likely to smooth things over with Jason because, she's got this guy friend. He's like a helicopter friend just hovering over watching her and her boyfriend. And of course, Jason was like, what's the deal? But Oliver said nothing and he would just walk away. And that wasn't the first time or the last that Oliver would play this game. Neither Michelle or Jason were thrilled, but Michelle would always let it slide. However, there was this one really pivotal weekend during Halloween when Jason and Michelle planned to have a really important talk about their future. And Oliver knew it. Of course he did, because he knew about what she was doing because she would share it. This particular meeting was to discuss whether or not Jason and Michelle were going to stay together and commit to building a future or they were going to break it off for good. And I can guess what Oliver probably wanted to happen. And that weekend, Oliver did it again. He came over unannounced and was kind of giving Jason a hard time. And maybe it's a guy thing like, hey, dude, should I get off the pot? Or maybe it was, doing Michelle a favor. Like, hey, you know what? If this guy's not ready to commit, why are you even wasting your time? I think Michelle was way too nice to get upset with Oliver. And like the last times, he ended up leaving. But this meeting was different because Jason proposed. Yes, Jason was now officially Michelle's fiancé. And this is exactly what Michelle had wanted for so long. She was ecstatic. She could not wait to tell all of her friends, and that is what she did because later that night, she's over Jessica's. She's just gushing about Jason. She was acting like a little schoolgirl. She was even calling her friends from back home, telling them all about this dream weekend. And of course, things had to go back to normal because it was fall semester and was coming to an end. There were finals happening soon, and then Thanksgiving and winter break, which is always a lot of fun, lots to do. But in this moment, she was just kind of enjoying the feeling, floating, on cloud 9 with happiness. About a week after this, after Halloween, something strange happens. A man named Peter, which is Michelle's landlord, tries calling her several times because he had to pick up some tools that he left over there to take care of some of his other units. And he gets no answer. Peter could always get in touch with Michelle. They had a good landlord-tenant relationship, and Michelle was very reliable. So it wasn't normal for her not to answer his calls. He was also a bit frustrated because, he needed these tools to do the work. But he was also a little worried. So he just simply dropped by her house and knocked on the door, and there was no answer at first. But all of a sudden, Some guy that he's never seen before, he's never met this man, opens the door, but he doesn't open it all the way. He kind of leans his head out and he's shirtless, his hair is kind of disheveled, and he looks at Peter and tells him, you know what, it's not a good time right now. Peter's sitting there like, what is going on? This is my unit. And he explains, like, I am the landlord. And the guy doesn't even flinch. He's like, okay, well, you know what? Just come back in a couple hours. That's strange. But is it? It's a shirtless guy at a young woman's home. And maybe it wasn't a good time, if you know what I mean, because it was a good time. I don't know. But eventually, Peter's phone rings, and it's Michelle. And she kindly apologizes, and she tells Peter, you know what? I'm really sorry. I was having a terrible migraine, and that was my friend there. He was helping me through it. A few days later, Michelle is over at Jessica's once again and gives her even more exciting news. Her and Jason are moving in together, and of course, Jessica is excited for her, but she says something that may have caught Michelle off guard. Maybe she said it because she knew Oliver was around somewhere in the house, and maybe he could hear them, maybe not. Either way, Jessica says, congratulations, I'm so happy for you, but what about Oliver? What about Oliver? Look, I don't know why she asked her this. I don't have every single detail. Maybe Oliver thought there was more between them. Maybe there was more. We don't know. It really didn't matter because in Michelle's mind, at least, they were just friends. And that's pretty much what she says to Jessica. She's like, there's nothing. It's not like that. He's nerdy. He's kind of annoying. You know, I'm only nice to him because he seems to need a friend. Kind of harsh. Kind of heartbreaking, I'd assume. But such is life, and life must go on. For now, anyway. The fall semester went by pretty fast. Thanksgiving was right around the corner. Michelle, she's got this really busy schedule. And it's even more busy with all the planning that she's doing for her break, graduation, and now moving in with her fiance. Michelle had a very predictable schedule. Weekdays, she would wake up, she would go to her classes, she would go to work, she would come home, and then maybe go hang out at Jessica's. And the weekends would be split between volunteering and partying with friends back at Jessica's. On Wednesday, November 9th, 2005, Michelle had plans to go to dinner with Jessica, but she's not answering her phone. Jessica's a little annoyed. She's calling her over and over again, leaving messages too. She thought that Michelle was mad at her. So she just kept saying, listen, if I did something to piss you off, let me know. Don't just ignore my calls. I feel that. I get really worried about my friends, and it's also one of my pet peeves when someone just ignores my call. But Jessica kind of chalks it up to her being busy, and she goes about her night never hearing from Michelle. Jessica's phone had died during the night, but when she finally charges it the next morning, which is Thursday, November 10th, she sees that she has a bunch of voice messages. One was from the gym where Jessica and Michelle work together. So Jessica's listening to this message and she finds out that Michelle never showed up to work, and that wasn't like her. She took work very seriously and she took her classes even more seriously. So when Jessica checked to see, did she attend? It was relayed to her that she actually didn't attend for the last couple days, and that was not like her at all. Now there was slight panic kind of setting in. Jessica's calling around. She's asking everyone who knows Michelle if they had heard from Michelle. And then Michelle's mom, Belinda, calls and it goes straight to voicemail because she's on the phone, with other friends. And Michelle plays the message. She sees that Belinda is worried and she hadn't heard from Michelle in a couple days. So she asked Jessica, can you just go over there to see if she's home? Jessica doesn't even call Michelle's mom back. Instead, she gets ready to make the short drive over there. She just throws on some clothes and gets in her car. Kind of surprising, but Belinda is also on her way over all the way from Live Oak, which I think is maybe an hour or like an hour and a half away. That's how worried she was. Jessica doesn't hesitate. She heads out the door and then she calls Belinda on the way. She has a short phone call just letting her know, hey, I'm going over there. But Belinda is really freaked out, which is probably freaking Jessica out more. And Jessica just assures her, I'm going to be there soon and I will call you as soon as I have news. Jessica pulls up to Michelle's house and begins walking up to the yard. When you've never experienced a crime scene, you don't exactly know how to react to what you're walking up to. There's no guidebook for your best friend turning up dead. Jessica attempts to walk right into Michelle's house like she's probably done hundreds of times, but she's intercepted by a detective. In this confusion, Jessica, she tries to push her way through and she explains, this is my friend's house. That's when the words that you never expect to hear came out of this detective's mouth. He says, "We found your friend Michelle deceased." It caught Jessica off guard, to say the least. What? It's incomprehensible. It's as though you pretend that you didn't hear this, but you know what they said. You know it's real, but it doesn't feel like it is. And that's when everything became a blur. And in this blur, Jessica notices a familiar face. Jason. Jason is sitting on the sidewalk, and he doesn't look good. How is this happening? And what happened to Michelle? How is Jason already there? There's just so many questions. And at this point, Michelle's mother is calling both Jason's phone and Jessica's, and neither one of them are answering. Before long, they actually see her car pull up. There's no words. There's no appropriate actions to take when someone loses a child. Now it's in the hands of the detectives. I don't want to, but of course, I'm going to tell you what the police found when they arrived to Michelle's house. But first, let's back up. Because of course, detectives are going to look at the fiance who lives 400 miles away and is standing at Michelle's doorstep, and they're wondering, is he involved in this? Apparently, according to him, Jason had also been calling Michelle over and over again in the last couple days, and she wasn't answering. Here's what I'm thinking, okay, she had this guy over. He was shirtless. She can't come to the door at the time. She's seeing this other guy, Scott. What happened to him? There's a lot to think about. We know that Michelle loved Jason. She wanted to be with him and him only, and it wasn't like her to ignore his calls. It was so unusual that Jason jumped into his car and raced over there in the middle of the night. He left Miami and made about a 5-hour drive to Michelle's because he was that worried about her. He told the police that when he got there, it was around 2 o'clock in the morning. He was banging on the door. No one was answering. He was calling her phone over and over again, and there was no answer, but he could literally hear it ringing from inside. He could also hear her dog barking nonstop, and there was an outside light on near her door that had been on from the night before. He decides at this point to look into a window, and from a crack in the blinds, he sees something. He spots Michelle's foot. Her bare foot is hanging off the end of the mattress in the middle of this room. Absolutely horrified, he calls the police, and they rush over and they end up prying her door open, banging her door down, and that's when they discovered Michelle's lifeless body. Let me set the scene for you, because everything is evidence. Though nothing looks like evidence at all. The windows and the doors were locked. There was no forced entry. All the lights were on, including that outdoor light that Jason saw when he arrived. The TV was on, and it was playing quite loudly. Of course, the dog is jumping all around the house. And once they get closer to Michelle, they could tell right away that she'd actually been there for quite some time. She was laying on her stomach, and her left arm was folded underneath her body. She was like laying on top of that arm. There was no bruising, no wounds, no bleeding, nothing that indicated a struggle of any kind. It looked as though she just hopped on her bed and fell asleep. Police had their death investigators begin to process the scene and, of course, transport Michelle to the medical examiner's office. Meanwhile, detectives are fanning out. They're questioning anyone living close by to see if they heard or saw anything. They were actually able to clear Jason right away. His work provided proof that he was all the way in Miami when the crime would have most likely taken place. As the crime scene is being processed, here's what they did and didn't find. No foreign fingerprints in the apartment, no forced entry, no valuables were missing, and the next step was to rule out an overdose. So they're combing her house looking for drug paraphernalia, and they find none. There were some beers in the fridge, typical, and there was a half-empty beer on her bed. So there's just a beer bottle right next to her body. So they went ahead and tested it for fingerprints, and only Michelle's were present. Naturally, they're sitting there thinking, could she have been poisoned by something in the beer? So they have it tested, and it comes back negative for any foreign substances. Back at the medical examiner's office, the doctor finds nothing even slightly wrong with Michelle. She's a healthy, fit young girl. No ailments of any kind. No disease, nothing. There was really no other choice at this point than to believe that Michelle died of natural causes. But it's just so unnatural for a young girl like her to just drop dead out of nowhere. They estimated that Michelle had been deceased 24 hours before her body was found. Now the police are building a timeline. Every single person that came into contact with Michelle in the last few days needed to be interviewed, so that's what they did. The very first person that they brought in was Michelle's best friend, Jessica. Of course, she was the closest to Michelle. They worked together. They hung out almost every day, so she would know about Michelle's life. I read a book about this entire interview, so I'm going to go off what the book detailed in regard to the information that Jessica provided to the police. I always leave my sources below, so if you want to gather any more information, if you want to read this book, everything will be linked in my sources section. This information would take the investigation in a whole new direction, along with something the medical examiner found. So I want to talk about that first. The first questionable thing about the way Michelle was found was the position of her body. Remember, she's face down, her left arm is tucked under her body, and it turns out that being face down isn't actually that common, at least for, let's say, someone who is sick or in pain, especially if they're in a fatal situation. They usually end up lying on their side in more of a fetal position, or they fall face up. This fact made the medical examiner dig deeper. And as our bodies go through the process of decomp, some injuries are more pronounced. After doing another exam, the medical examiner noticed something, and it was a very, very, very small, but it was a puncture wound, tiny one, on her left arm, the same arm that she's laying on. And it appeared to be created from a needle, but it wasn't in the spot that, let's say, like a drug user would typically inject drugs. It was on her left arm, and I didn't see the autopsy report, but when I heard this, I could only assume that it wasn't in, the arm crease where we're all used to giving blood or having an IV put in. They contacted Michelle's primary physician to ask whether or not Michelle had recently had blood work or done an IV of any kind, and the answer was no. Now they had to rule out recreational drug overdose. They didn't find any paraphernalia, but are they going to find anything in a toxicology test? So that's what they did. Meanwhile, let's jump back to Jessica's interview. When asked who else would hang out regularly with Jessica and Michelle, she told them a girl named Sonia, another one named Sky, and of course her roommate, Oliver. As soon as the police hear about a guy, they want to know all about him. Also because they had heard Oliver's name before from Jason. When Jason was asked if he knew anyone that he thought was suspicious, he said Oliver, given those encounters he had the last few times he visited Michelle. Jason explained that Oliver seemed to be infatuated with Michelle, that he would pop in unannounced, or seemingly so, since Michelle insisted, no, I didn't expect him to drop by, especially when she had made plans for Jason to be over there. She even said that she had no idea how Oliver knew that Jason was coming over on those days, and it was like he might have been, eavesdropping on her or keeping tabs. However, we know that Oliver was close to Michelle, but it didn't mean that he did anything to her. Here's the thing. The more time that Michelle spent with Oliver, the more her friends would tease her and question her about what the deal was. One of her friends kind of confronted her about it. And even though she did it in a joking manner, she was starting to think that Michelle had a crush on Oliver because it seemed that way. She said something to the effect of, okay, I thought it was Oliver that had a crush on you, but it seems like it might be the other way around. And again, Jessica denied it. And as a matter of fact, she kind of hinted that she noticed Oliver was really trying to worm his way into her heart and her world, which I don't blame him for. She's a pretty girl. She's, got a lot going for her. She's likable. Jessica described Oliver as funny, quirky, and a people pleaser, especially when it came to Michelle. She said that she noticed from day one that Oliver had a crush on her. Once at a party, Michelle was sitting at a table talking to friends, and then Oliver just sat down right next to her. And when she decided to move at one point, Oliver picked up his chair and moved it right next to Michelle's. Jessica said all of this laughing to police. She was just kind of saying he followed her around like a little lost puppy dog. I mean, when you like someone, you want to be around them. It's not that weird, but if you don't like them, it may make you feel uncomfortable with that attention. Not only that, Jessica told them about this story Michelle told her. So one day, Michelle came home from the dog park and she tells Jessica that she saw Oliver at the dog park. Now you see, it doesn't sound so weird, but Oliver didn't own a dog. But then she realizes when she leaves the dog park, starts walking her own dog, Oliver does have a dog, but he lives with Jessica. And Michelle knows there's no dog at Jessica's house. So where did he get this dog? He proceeded to follow Michelle down the street, kind of trying to make small talk about their dogs. And again, she's sitting there thinking, what is going on here? And it was pretty innocent, but it just seemed odd. And maybe they were looking too far into it, especially if you're looking back on something. You're trying to connect all these dots, so you're thinking of all these things that could be suspicious. Investigators then interviewed Belinda, and this is one of the most difficult things that she's ever had to do in her entire life. This is a mother talking about her daughter who had just passed away. And officers on the scene had to actually help her off the ground because she almost nearly passed out. When she heard the news about her daughter, it was just a shock. I mean, of course it was. The pain is unbearable. But at this point, she's determined to find out what happened to her daughter. So she tries to compose herself. She takes a deep breath and she's sitting in front of Detective Douglas, telling him everything she knew about her daughter, about her dreams of attending University of Florida before she got in. And she talked about how she spoke to her at least once a day. And as a matter of fact, usually up to 4 times a day. They were really close. And God, I can actually imagine that pain because I'm a mom. And it just breaks my heart to think that you just spoke to your daughter and that you guys are so close and you share everything together. I know that if I didn't hear from her in 2 days, I would be worried, and that's why she jumped in the car. It's like you have that intuition. Detective Douglas asked her when she spoke to Michelle last, and this is when she couldn't contain the sadness. Tears were just flowing like a waterfall. She couldn't speak, and Detective Douglas, he just waited. He had to wait patiently, knowing he needed to give her time. Finally, Belinda regained her composure, and she said she spoke to Michelle around 11 p.m. on Monday, November 7th. And of course, we are probably sitting there like the detective was on the edge of our seats wondering, what was the final conversation about? She revealed that information. She said Michelle was on the top of the world. She was telling her all about Jason's plan to move from Miami to Gainesville to be closer to her. Douglas asked if Belinda knew if Michelle had any plans for the rest of that night or even the next few days, and what Belinda told him made him do a double take. Belinda explained that Michelle said Oliver was on his way over. Oliver, yes, Oliver at 11 p.m. That's kind of odd. So then he asked Belinda, why? Belinda explained, with Oliver's knowledge of Africa, Michelle had asked him for help on a paper that she had to turn in about AIDS in Africa. But for some reason, when Belinda's explaining this, it's as though she's looking at Douglas like she kind of didn't believe that story. Like she kind of didn't believe Michelle was really having him over for that reason, that she was kind of just making it up. If she's inviting this guy over, a guy that she says she doesn't like romantically, what's the reason there could be for this visit? But then in the next breath, Belinda says Michelle took issue with Oliver and his actions. For example, he supposedly called her numerous times a day at all hours and would drop by unannounced, which we've heard. Belinda explained that Michelle never addressed it with him because she was too nice and she felt bad for him. But then why invite him over there? That confused me. There was some information missing. Can you guess what it is? Because I was starting to at this point. And since he had heard the name Oliver a number of times, Douglas was ready to call him in for an interview. And it was going to be even more imperative that police talk to Oliver because something investigators just found outside of Michelle's house. Back at the medical examiner's office, the drug toxicology report just came back and it was negative for recreational drugs. And I'm talking the main ones: cocaine, heroin, marijuana, etc. So how can they explain this apparent needle mark on Michelle's arm? Back at the crime scene, investigators noticed that one of Michelle's trash cans was missing a trash bag. That's kind of unusual, especially since it was close to where the bed was located. They moved their search outside to where the community garbage bins were located, and thankfully the trash had not been hauled away yet. If it had, they may have never solved Michelle's case. That's insane. And it reminds me so much of the Lauren Giddings case. If you haven't watched that video, go check it out. Not now, but after this. You can find it above in the cards. I don't know if it's on this side or that side. You can click that little info button later on in the video. I'll also link it below. Investigators find a grocery bag and it's tied closed. They look inside and they confirm it came from Michelle's house. It contained bills and mail that was addressed to her. But there's something else. There's something shocking at the bottom of this bag. Y'all, there were syringes and needles and a bottle of something inside. A bottle of propofol. That's the drug that killed Michael Jackson. This is a very highly regulated drug. It's a very powerful, very potent, and potentially dangerous drug that can cause an overdose. It really does not take much of this drug to render someone incapacitated and eventually take their life. Now, you might be thinking, they just did a drug toxicology report, so wouldn't they know if this was in her system? Toxicology tests do not look for this drug. As a matter of fact, the medical examiner had never ever worked on a single case where someone had died of a propofol overdose. This was the very first time where she would even need to run a specific test to confirm this. But ultimately, that's exactly what happened. Michelle had died of a propofol overdose. A toxic amount of the drug was found in her system. And in case you're like me and you want to know just a little bit about propofol, it's referred to as the milk of anesthesia since it doesn't dissolve in water and it comes in this white, oily solution and must be refrigerated before it's used, just like milk would be stored in the refrigerator to keep it from spoiling. According to this article from Harvard Health, propofol is used exclusively by anesthesiologists. This is the drug they use if you've ever had surgery and they say, count down from 100 to 1. And by the time you get to like 98, you can't even remember anything. The drug causes loss of consciousness for general anesthesia in major surgeries. And then in lower doses, it's used for conscious sedation. It lowers the blood pressure and suppresses breathing. And because of this, the vital signs of a patient need to be monitored constantly. There's a doctor that was interviewed for this article, and they're quoted saying, "I would never leave a patient unattended for a second. For a second." As more of a pain relief agent for less serious outpatient procedures, it's perfect because there's a quick onset and it also wears off quickly like a switch. There's also no side effects once it wears off. You're not nauseous afterwards, you don't have a hangover, nothing. And this is why it can become very addictive, especially for people who use it for pain relief or to go to sleep like Michael Jackson did. Apparently Michael Jackson, he was desperate to sleep. And there are plenty of people like Michael Jackson who want to get their hands on propofol because it is this powerful sleep aid and it can be used for migraines. And let's not forget, Michelle was in pain. She had chronic migraines. Just a week or so before her death, someone was at her house helping her with a migraine when the landlord stopped by. It wasn't a good time because the truth was Michelle was under the influence of propofol. Allegedly, and most likely according to what I read in this case. And it makes sense to me, given the only thing that helped me function when I was unable to sit up or eat in the hospital was morphine, but it made me sick. So I'm thinking if I had the option of propofol, I would have taken it. I know I would have. And I don't pass judgment on Michelle, though I don't believe I would have personally done a drug like this at home without supervision at an actual hospital, but nevertheless, they now had a connection between Michelle, the propofol, and the needle mark. They also found a butterfly needle in the bag, and if you're not familiar with what this is or what it looks like, here it is on the screen. It's generally used as a pediatric device to deliver medication into your veins or to draw blood. It gets its name from these two little wings that help stabilize it on your body. The butterfly needle requires a shallower angle, and the length of the needle is smaller. Why would Michelle need a butterfly needle? Well, as they interviewed her close friends and family, it turns out she was terrified of needles. And I have to say, I was too for a long time. But she wasn't administering this drug on her own, so that's not what was going on here. This was done by a professional. She could not do this alone, plus she would have had to dispose of the evidence found in the bag at least 60 feet away outside of her house. Even though she may have been scared, she trusted someone trusted them enough to let them inject her. And you can probably guess who? Oliver. He's a surgical nurse. He offered her medication to help with the pain of her migraines. This is one reason that I think she allowed him to stay in her life, because drugs are a powerful motivator for doing something that you would not usually be inclined to do. Hence, keeping him around, though she supposedly called him annoying and not her type. It's really sad. But this whole situation is sad. But was this an accident, or was it something more? At the level that she received, Michelle would have fallen unconscious within seconds. Then it would have caused her to completely stop breathing. One thing that I can say that's a positive, there's no positives, but she did not suffer any pain. Not as though that is a reason not to be disgusted and saddened by this case. It may seem pretty obvious that Oliver did this, but without evidence linking him to the propofol, they couldn't build a case against him, so they make a visit to Shands Hospital. Meanwhile, all the syringes were being tested for fingerprints and none were found. I'm guessing gloves were worn and then discarded elsewhere. Maybe they were put into the person's pockets and then put in the trash later somewhere else. But they needed to connect someone to the propofol. They were, however, able to connect Michelle's DNA to the butterfly needle since there was blood left behind inside the tube. Additionally, her blood was mixed with propofol, so this solidified the cause of death and the manner of death, overdose, and classified as a homicide. At this point, an investigator gives the medical examiner an idea. He remembers that the last time he received an injection, the nurse used her teeth, this whole thing, to take the cap off of the syringe. And it turns out, and I know you've probably seen this is a common practice. So he says, why not test the caps for saliva and DNA? And this is a great idea. The medical examiner didn't even think of this. Back at the hospital, they find out that each and every bottle has a national drug control number on it, as well as a lot number, and this is how they are tracked and accounted for. The bottles were shipped from McKesson Pharmaceuticals, and they were shipped to Shands Hospital, and they were available for use during the time that Oliver was there. I didn't know this, but these drugs are stored in an auto dispensing machine in the ICU. It's kind of like a soda machine, but instead of using money to dispense the items, a patient number is used. Oliver's employee number was plugged in to retrieve the propofol. So this is the very first concrete connection that they needed. This, in and of itself, which is called drug diversion, is a felony. And it can result in the nurse's criminal prosecution and, of course, the loss of their license. Oliver was in trouble, but where was he? Maybe they hadn't found him yet, but they found his DNA on the cap of one of those syringes. Yes, this is the second concrete connection. Douglas goes to Shands once again to speak with Oliver, but they tell him he was fired on November 9th. And that's odd, because that's the day before Michelle's body was discovered. He asked them why Oliver was fired, thinking that the hospital must have found out that he had stolen drugs, but they say that was a coincidence. No, his skills were not up to par for the quality that they desired and expected at a hospital of that caliber. Simple as that. Yes, there were rumors about medications missing, but that wasn't even worth their time to investigate. They just wanted to let him go, just easily. Oliver had been working part-time at another medical facility called Nature Coast. On November 28th, almost a month after Michelle's death, Douglas went there to track him down. He's waiting in the parking lot until he spots Oliver walking in, and he follows him, and he's calling his name, but Oliver just keeps on walking. Finally, he caught up to him, and this time he shouted, "Oliver O'Quinn?" That's when Oliver spun around to face him. Douglas is like, I guess you couldn't hear me in the parking lot. And he introduces himself. He says, "I'm Detective Douglas." And Oliver responds with, "Really? What can I do for you?" And I'm just sitting here stunned. Really? Your friend is dead, dude. What do you think you can help him with? Douglas says just that. He says, "Michelle, your friend, she's dead." And Oliver, he's sitting there sweating. And he basically responds with, "Oh yeah, I heard about that." And Douglas says, "Weren't you guys friends?" And this a-hole says, "No, we were acquainted, really?" Douglas isn't buying that, so he snaps back at him saying, "Then how do you explain her phone records?" There were 43 incoming calls from Oliver to Michelle in less than a month every single day for 9 days leading up to her death, but never afterward. Why not? He asked him this. No answer. Douglas lets Oliver know they need to speak with him, but Oliver says, I'm late for work and I'll have to contact you later. He's not under arrest, so there's not much they can do. Douglas hands Oliver his card and leaves after Oliver's empty promise to call him back as soon as he could. The next part, I'm going to run through quickly. There's no need to go into detail. The dude goes on the run. Who runs when they're innocent? He goes home to Jessica's. He packs his bags. Jessica's watching him pack his bags. He says, I'm going on a vacation. And that's just its impeccable timing. Jessica immediately alerts Douglas, and it turns out that Oliver stops by his ex-wife's house, probably to say goodbye to his daughter because he most likely knew he was going to be arrested. Flash forward. It's April of 2006. Yes, all that time had gone by. And guess where Oliver is? In his homeland, Ireland. It is pretty much impossible to get someone extradited back to the U.S. from Ireland. Ireland has a strong opposition to the death penalty, and Oliver had already applied for a medical license, and he was working over there. Ugh, it makes me sick. Douglas didn't have any options until a journalist from Ireland reaches out. This is a journalist from Ireland Times named Sean O'Driscoll, and he reaches out and he tells Douglas he thinks that the Irish people should know how dangerous Oliver could be. He says, why not I publish an article detailing Michelle's death and Oliver's potential involvement? He believed that this would cause a public outcry leading to Oliver fleeing. Sean's article is printed on April 20th, 2006, and it worked. 8 weeks later, Interpol reports a sighting of him in Africa. And in a turn of good luck for investigators, Oliver makes a mistake. Of course he does. He shows up at the United States Embassy in West Africa to get his hands on some money that had been sent to him. Less than 24 hours later, he was arrested in Senegal, and then he was deported and turned over to the U.S. Marshals. 2 years later, he's on trial for Michelle's murder. He pleads not guilty. The defense argued that this was an accident. It was consensual. Michelle agreed to allow Oliver to administer the propofol for her migraines. And that night, too much was given to her on accident. But prosecutors' story was different. They argued Oliver was jealous of the other men in Michelle's life. He was obsessed, and he felt shunned by Michelle. Therefore, if he couldn't have her, no one could. They backed up this story with testimony from his cellmate, Thomas. I have to say, this isn't really the best evidence, coming from a cellmate, but he stated that when Oliver Quinn came into the cell, he got him to open up to him about Michelle. According to a book that I read, here's what Oliver said happened. Oliver told Thomas that he really did love Michelle, and he was under the impression that she loved him too. He said he was really good to her. He would help her with her schoolwork. He would take her out to coffee. He would listen to her vent. He would think about her all day long. Thomas asked Oliver if Michelle knew how he felt, and Oliver said, how could she not? But he explained how he found out how Michelle really felt about him when they were at a party at Jessica's. Oliver said he couldn't find Michelle, so he went looking for her, and he finds out she's on the phone with the guy she really loved, Jason. Thomas wanted to know how Oliver knew it was Jason on the other line, and Oliver said he overheard Michelle reassuring him that he had nothing to worry about when it came to Oliver. And he can't believe what he's hearing, because here's the guy that lives over 4 hours away, hardly present in her life, Oliver being there for her every single day, yet she wanted him. She wanted Jason. And then she has to reassure Jason that Oliver pretty much meant nothing. It infuriated him. Her words, according to Oliver, relayed by Thomas, were this: "Don't worry about Oliver. He's just an annoying little man." Thomas, wanting to hear more, played along with Oliver, telling him if he heard something like that, he would be pissed. So he asked Oliver, "What did you do about it?" And that's when he told the jury that Oliver said this: "I decided since she put me down, I would put her down. She was going to have a long, peaceful sleep." That's disgusting. As the prosecution rested, the lead attorney ended with this line: "For Michelle, death had a familiar face." And that stuck with me because I tend to imagine the last thing a person saw before they died. It's believed that Oliver had befriended Michelle, started to become infatuated with her, and eventually, either to be kind at first or to further some sick plan, he gained her trust enough to administer IV drugs to her for supposedly her migraines. They don't know if it was propofol from the beginning or not. There's no way to tell that. Could have been another drug and then the propofol was given. But what they do know was on that night of November 8th, 2005, when she trusted him to relieve her pain, he betrayed that trust and injected her with 4 times the lethal dose of propofol. And that was no accident, considering the amount. Michelle was dead in seconds. And they think that he purposely, as a nurse and knowing these things, placed her body the way that he did for 2 reasons. 1, to use her body weight to press on the arm to put pressure on the prick point to keep it from bleeding, and also to keep it from being as visible right away. Oliver didn't take the stand in his defense. He never even apologized, even if it was an accident. That's how cold-hearted he was. This was your friend, a girl that he says he loves. Even given the opportunity by the judge to say something to Michelle's family, especially following these impact statements, he refused. This was the first murder ever recorded by the use of propofol. It only took 90 minutes of deliberation for a jury to find Oliver guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. He followed an appeal right after the trial, and it was denied. The small things mattered in this case. The devil is in the details, as they say. The devil was also in Michelle's home that night. A familiar face, as the prosecution said. And I'd like to leave you with something at the end of these videos, so I want to leave you with this. When it comes to our children, we try our hardest to teach them how to look for signs, to beware of evil people, and to choose their friends wisely. We imagine that once they reach adulthood, they will be equipped with the right tools to make the best decisions to keep themselves safe. We also, probably with a false sense of security, assume that by the time they're Michelle's age, 24, they've passed the age that they would be at risk. They survived childhood, the time when we fear our children might be kidnapped while just playing outside. They survived learning to drive, and they're living their lives. They're planning for their future, so we don't expect their kindness to be a weakness and lead to their death. But that's exactly what happened here. It just proves there are things that we cannot teach our children and people that we cannot protect them from, no matter what we do, no matter how much effort we put in to keep them safe. And that's sad. I hope that none of us have to lose anyone that we love the way the Michelle's family lost her. This was hard. This was a really hard case. No one like Michelle deserved this. And that's all I have for you today. I thank you once again so very much for being here. And if you haven't subscribed, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye.